Hey everyone, welcome back. Yet another week of game design here at CG Spectrum. So hopefully everybody's having a good week. And everybody, at least in the US, is getting ready for your long holiday weekend this coming weekend. So today we're going to kind of continue on. Last week we started kind of random ramblings about storytelling in games. And this week we're going to kind of continue along that in the vein of creative direction, what a creative director does, and kind of some higher level stuff there. And so we're going to talk today about quest design and really focus today on narrative quests and kind of continuing a lot of the topics like we started last week about stories and storytelling and all that kind of stuff, and how is that going to relate to creating quests and being a great level designer or quest designer, right? And so again, we're going to focus on games that are more story driven and with the intention of showing how to make better stories in quests and things like that. So we're going to be talking more in like RPGs and kind of those types of games more so than like systemically driven games that are a bit more, go kill 20 of these things, go kill, X number of those or that type of thing, which again, those are still valid and we will talk about those today. But again, the intention today is to really talk about how to improve your story quests. For those of you that are here live and can see the live chat, I just put in a link to an article I wrote some time ago, but about how to improve MMOs and MMO level design in general, and it has a lot of stuff there on quest designs and improving stuff. So I'm going to be using that, referencing that a few times today. So feel free to read that and check it out. It's like 22 pages of hopefully some good nuggets of information. And again, like whether you're designing MMOs or whether you're designing RPGs, or single player or or multiplayer, they're not MMOs, or any kind of quests, there's a lot to learn from the dynamics of what MMO quests do, because they definitely are their own unique thing, right? And so today, we are going to not specifically talk about MMOs, just so you know. This is really a more generalized talk about just quests in general. But again, hopefully, articles like this will help you out and you can learn a few things. But again, there's lessons there to be learned, even if you're making single player games. So, but MMOs are like a whole nother world and complexity. If you've never designed one or never worked on one, they just get exponentially more complicated to design. So, all right. Hi, Alexios. Hi, Penny. Welcome, everybody. So, again, today's talk, on quest design and level design related topics will be primarily targeted at narrative-driven stuff for game designers. But again, I know there's a lot of artists, both, that go to CG Spectrum, that are involved there, and I'm going to try to incorporate as much kind of understanding of how art is involved in the process of quests and quest design and stories just kind of in general as well. So, if you're an artist and you're watching this, there's the world of level design and level art, and storytelling, narrative with art are very, very tight, right? There's a lot of stuff. That old adage of a picture's worth 1,000 words is very true. And so I want you to kind of see that, both the ideation of like, how do I come up with something cool and how do I put that in a game if you're an artist, how that applies into these quests and stories in general. But also just, every aspect of what you're designing, in an art, and how you're designing it really can affect, the gameplay a lot and can affect the quests tremendously. And so there needs to be a tight partnership there. And so as an artist, if you're watching this, please just keep an open mind and understand that, day to day, if you want to work in games, you're probably going to be working with game designers, and we're an unruly bunch that you kind of have to put up with. So you gotta figure out how to deal with us, each day, right? And so, but in all sincerity, like you have to learn how to work as a team, right? And so all of these ideas are applicable, whether you're an engineer, whether you're an artist, whether you're a game designer, or working in any aspects of games. Hopefully today's talk will help you. So, hey, Big Lob. Good to see you. All right. So again, please like and subscribe if you guys are new here or haven't yet. And hopefully you're enjoying these talks. Next week, we will be having some kind of a surprise. I haven't decided what that is yet. But next week will be my 50th episode, 50th live stream. So there will be 100 hours of me rambling on endlessly to put you to sleep at night. And so, we're going to try to do something kind of fun next week. And if anybody has any ideas throughout this talk today about anything special, whether it's a special topic you want, or maybe playing through a special game, or I don't know what we can do online to celebrate 50 episodes of this, But thank you all that have watched even a fraction of those. I do appreciate your valuable time watching me, hopefully give you some nuggets of great information. So anyways, so again, if you got any ideas for next week's talk, please, tell me here or tell me later if you have me on Slack or whatever. But I'd love to hear your ideas for anything next week. So, and just as a heads up, the week after is a break. We're not CG Spectrum's not streaming that week. So we will see you all here next week, and then we'll figure out where to resume things about creative direction in a few weeks from now. So, all right, let's dive into this. So, quest design. Now, quests are, really common and really popular within, the vast majority of games, right? And whether you call them, a mission or an objective or whatever, name that we call them, the quests, within a level and within the level structure of a game or the world of a game, right? Are very important, to most games, right? And they really are often the meat and potatoes of what the player does. And really, to oversimplify kind of the way most games or a lot of games are structured, you can think about like the two things that really a player does is like he does quests, meaning there's designer driven, story driven, emergently driven things that the player is supposed to do to play the game, and to move through the game, often following a storyline or some kind of progression. And then I would call them the emergent systemic side of the game, meaning, what are all the things that I just do naturally? Like if I move through a world and I see something bad, do I just go kill it? If I see some, something valuable on the ground, do I pick it up and I loot it? Do I go places just to kill things, to level myself up and make myself more powerful, to, gain XP, gain loot, money, whatever resources that is? And so all that is also another reason to be doing quests. And so quests are quite often this progression of gameplay, but the quests and the emergent gameplay both work really hand in hand, together. And sometimes there's a lot of codependency between them. Depending on your game again, some quests may only be available in certain areas, and you have to get there, somehow, but you may not be able to get there until you're a higher level character, right? And so you either need to progress through a bunch of quests to get strong enough or to unlock that new quest, or you need to maybe go and play emergently for a while, and maybe I need to be able to be strong enough or have enough money or do something, that's going to allow me to do that next quest, right? And so I might have to go what we call often grinding. We might have to go in and grind for a while and build stuff up, to make myself stronger and stronger and stronger, right, as I'm playing through the game. And then eventually that might give me the capability of playing a particular quest. And so that comes into then, like, how are quests, how do they come about as a player? Like, do you really understand as a game designer, like, how quests are brought into the world, so to speak? One sec. Alexios, playing some games, deconstructing could work nicely as a special live. Yeah, I'll think about that. Let me see if there's some new game that I've been wanting to play that we could do a deconstruction next week and make it a little fun. It's me up here rambling for 2 hours is actually a pretty hard thing. So sometimes it's nice to have a bit of a break as well. So we'll take that into consideration. All right. So the first thing is kind of like understanding, a quest within the context of your game. And as a game designer, you want to start off figuring out kind of what is the high level, what is the high level of the game, structure going to be. And we often call them level design or quest designs, or levels or quests or areas of a game. And what we're referring to in the old days is we literally not to say that it still doesn't exist, but the idea of a level, right? And this thing that exists literally as a separate kind of entity that was literally something we had to load into memory. And those things existed usually because we couldn't stream. We couldn't have multiple levels in memory or multiple areas in memory, unlike today's, open world or streaming games, things like that. The tech didn't allow that. So we literally built levels. And so that was where, the ideas kind of started, was we had a level, and then within a level we had things to do that were generally encapsulated within a fixed area, right? And that fixed area was literally there for technical memory reasons as much as anything, and that level was built by a level designer. And that level designer, usually kept everything to that one level. The more codependencies that you had of having quests and things go between multiple levels. Now they could build on each other, but you generally didn't have a lot of games that were, do part A of this quest in this level and then part B over in this level. Occasionally that would happen, but it wasn't that much. But the level designer really kind of controlled that. And so then within that level or that area, became a bunch of things to do, which was my quest. And there's generally, as a simplification, there's generally a beginning and an end, right? And I load into a level, and I start the level, and then at some point I'm going to exit the level, right? Now, it could be very linear, it could be non-linear, it could be branching paths, it could be an open world within that level. There's lots and lots of ways to structure it. And then the quests within that can follow that same kind of methodology, right? Like, do the quests go, number 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, or the quests going, 1 to 3 to 6 to 10, 11, 4, and you're bouncing around, and how do you, as a quest designer, as a level designer, structure your level, and that's, or your area. And so for the sake of this, for today, we'll talk about, and I'll use the terminology level, but I want to be clear that, like, if you're building an open world game, or if you're building something that's a little, larger in scale, or whatever it is, if you think about how an open world game is, without getting into the complexities of MMOs and open worlds and, bigger worlds just in general, and streaming and that whole thing, those do get a lot more complicated, but it's the same idea that even if I'm designing an open world game, you still often want to break it into areas, right? Like, you might have a city here, you might have a desert here, you have the snowy mountain area over here, the dwarf fortress is down here, and those areas quite often get isolated both in terrain, like you have mountains and oceans and rivers and things that block off things into logical kind of areas that are kind of manageable. And then what ends up happening in production is that level designer, takes an area and takes a chunk of something, and then occasionally quests will be able to go, out and take you around other places. But that's, a much more complicated thing. But what that brings up is, what is a quest? What is one of the main things that a quest does in the game? So think about, like, what typically happens when you go into a world and you take on a quest, right? What is one of those things that's more often than not? You're generally given a task, right? And so then that task has a location. So a quest very rarely is going to be something where you're standing physically in a location. You're often talking to a guy, and we'll get into how we initiate quests. But let's just say that we have what we might call a quest giver, somebody who's going to, I'm going to have a dialogue conversation with them. They're going to tell me to go do something, and that unlocks and spawns and starts this quest. That's one of the most typical analogies kind of used in these sorts of things. That quest giver, though, is not usually going to turn around and go, hey, talk to Fred, who's standing right here, and, why don't you kill Fred, and then, and do something to his body or whatever, and that's what you do for your quest. Like, no, generally it's like, Fred is on the other side of the world or the other side of the map, or he's somewhere far away, and you need to go find Fred. You need to go track him down, and you're probably going to have to do 5 or 10 things to even find him in the first place, to get through all of his guards and do all of the stuff, and then ultimately be able to kill Fred. And then maybe you get some loot, from Fred, or maybe you come back and bring his head, to this guy, and he gives you the sword of power, as a thank you, right? These very typical kind of quest structures. But why is that important in the game when you're understanding very early on about how quests are structured? Well, a quest is taking you through a place. It's making you take a journey. It's making you take a trip, and you're going to go from one place to another as you're doing this this quest, right? And that's an important, powerful piece of what we have as a level designer, because we get to take you someplace, but we're taking you down a path that maybe there's a couple paths to get there. I mean, it could be you're going to go from point A to point B, and there could be 100 ways or 2 ways or whatever to get between those points. But we still know in the beginning you're here, and at the end you're over here, right? Those 2 points are fixed with some paths or path in between, right? And that becomes an important, powerful tool for us as game designers and as storytellers, right? Because we know there's a beginning and we know there's an end, right? And there's a journey in between, right? So that's where quests are starting. That's where quests are doing it. And that doesn't mean that a quest has to be, a very linear thing, meaning like I start the quest, I end the quest, right? That journey, and that's probably the most typical one of like, I start the quest, here, I go along this whole path, I get to this guy, I kill him, quest's over, and I get my reward, right? Now, that would be the most basic, a very simple form of quest, right? A very, very typical, go kill somebody quest. Or it could be, the next one's a little more complicated, a fetch quest. Or something similar where, I am going to go find some object, I'm going to pick up that object, and I have to bring it back to the same guy or a different guy, right? We call those like a fetch quest. So in those particular cases, they're generally an out and a back, or the pathway could get blocked. So as I'm traveling down here, maybe the bridge collapses or something. And so now as I get to the object, I can't just go back and retrace the exact same path. So now I got to go and take a whole nother path. So that whole quest becomes this looping journey, right? And again, getting into stories and storytelling and things, and understanding narrative and quest design, right? The path that we go through is going to really determine, what are we going to do, right? What happens along that path? Who are the people that we meet along that path? What are the enemies and and problems and puzzles and other things that we encounter along that path? What is the loot and the other stuff that's going to go along that path? So understanding the path or that journey for each quest is really important. And then how multiple quests all start to now work together. If I have to have let's say 10 quests, or 10 missions on a single level or in a single area, and I want the player to do those in, let's say, semi-linear order. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfectly linear. But if I send you on that quest and you end up, way over here, and this could be an hour of like player movement, running across this big map, or it could be 20 minutes, whatever, if I'm way over here and now to even get the next quest, to even start it, I have to go way back over here, and then start the quest, and then way back over there. Like, that can be good, and then it gets you to cross the path of the map and gets you to explore things, but also can get really tedious, right? And so you as designers have to get like really intimately familiar with like the whole map and understand, how does this journey designed to take you throughout this whole land, right? How is it designed to take you, on this experience throughout it, and how are multiple quests going to work together to take you across this whole thing? And quite often, in best cases, like, how do I cross paths? How do I, find, like, I might meet one person one time and learn one thing from him or something, and then ultimately I loop back around and then I meet him again, right? And now he gives me some new information, and then I come back around and I find out he's the bad guy. Now I got to kill him, or whatever, right? But even traversing through the same areas multiple times, things like that, there's an art form to that journey, that quest of where it's going to take you. And that's why we call it a quest, right? It's what are we after? What are we going to do, right? And so that's what's kind of an important job of the level designer or the quest designer. So, really quick, I want to just do a little bit of a side conversation here. So, sidebar. We have, in our industry, quite often, we have a level designer job and we have a quest designer job in some companies. And there is other definitions, around that, but I want to talk just really briefly about what the difference is. So you'll find the job description of a quest designer typically, and then sometimes like a narrative designer is in there as well. And a narrative designer is sometimes can be the same as a writer and can also be a slightly different variant between quest designer and level designer, and again, narrative designer and writer. A lot of those will either be the same job with different names or whatever. So if you're going out to get a job and you're looking and you're interested in this area, what I'm talking about today, keep in mind that there's a lot of overlap, right? There's a lot of things that they often do very similar things, but they also can do slightly different things that you need to kind of understand. And I do have some previous talks in my stream about more specifically what these jobs are. But in short, if you see a company that has both level designers and quest designers, quite often the level designer is the guy who is really focused more on the artistic side of building out a level, building the level physically, going from the white box all the way to the physical construction. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not level artists that are also on the project that are helping him make it pretty, but he's working on like the minute-to-minute gameplay. He's working on, a lot of those types of things within the game. So the emergent systemic systems of the game is what he's focused on primarily. And then the quest designers, or sometimes the narrative designer, are really the guy that just implement the quests. So that means that the other level designer is implementing, enemies and things like that are not related to quests. So any of the gameplay, any of the mechanics that don't specifically relate to a specific quest, the level designer does. And then the quest designer, again, would implement the full quests from, potentially writing. Again, they might have quest designers and a writer, whereas quite often what would happen is that the level designer, quest designer type person might take a first pass at a lot of story, and they might do kind of an initial thing, and then a writer might come in and just polish it. And we'll get more into that a little bit, but I just want you to be aware that there's 2, 3, 4 different jobs that are all kind of stepping on each other's toes there. And the bigger the team, so if you get into really big AAA teams, you go to Blizzard or things like that, they're going to have all 4, on the same team. So a World of Warcraft team or something would have a level designer who's doing the levels themselves, the quest designer implementing quests, with a narrative designer who is implementing, who does the writing, but is then implementing, like, for instance, the conversation systems, the dialogue trees, those kind of things. So every time you have a conversation, there's branching dialogues and things like that. There in some games there's so much of that that it just becomes super crazy. And then like if you look at a game like Disco Elysium, I think they said there was 1 million lines of dialogue, if I remember that correctly. And I just was reading about another one last night with like 300,000 lines of dialogue. So when you have that much dialogue, right, that many lines of people talking back and forth and branches and all these things, there could be a dedicated guy just to setting up like all the conversations in the game, and then a writer as well to like polish all the dialogue and make sure that the dialogue's written really well. But a writer typically is not technical, so that person that's the narrative designer needs to be like slightly technical and know how to work the computer to implement these things at a scripting language or within some tool. And then, a quest designer needs to be even more technical because they need to spawn enemies and do other things related to that quest. And then the level designer probably has to be even more technical, or more artistic. And so the four of those can work together. But on a smaller team, you might just have one person that does all of that. So just be aware of there's no industry standards here, but I don't want you to get confused as we talk today about this thing about whose job is this, because this sounds really cool and I want to do this, but like, what do I apply for, right? What do I do? And so just be aware that there's a couple jobs in there, and and they're all really fun jobs. And if you're interested in getting into one of these jobs, there's again, lots of little niches you can get into. But the level designer job is probably the biggest with the most opportunities. A little fewer quest designers, and then a lot less narrative designers, and a lot less writers, right? So just keep that in mind too as far as opportunity. Oh, hi Penny. Oh, great! You're doing a level design in the concept art course right now, and yeah, no, I'm glad you're getting to see this. I mean, and hopefully you can see understand, how, like I talked about in the very beginning, like even as a concept artist, right, you need to have some understanding about what a level is. You don't just sit down and start designing a level. And as you'll see, if you watch some of my previous live streams, I do have a bunch of talks on level design in levels, and that you have to kind of start off. You don't start off just concepting a piece of art. I mean, you can if you want to look and feel, but to truly design a game in a level, you need to understand what is in that level, right? What is in that thing? And so that's actually a good segue into where do we start with quests? Because we need to know, like, what's in our level, right? We need to know what's in our game. And so at some level, you can't just go in and start level designing. You can't just start drawing a concept for something, because, what am I designing? Is that fun? Is that cool? Like, how big should it be? How small should it be? How complicated? Like, what are my gameplay features? Do I have vehicles? Can I fly? Do I swim? Like, where's the environment? Is this on Mars, or is it on, a fantasy world somewhere? Like, I mean, there's all these questions that we have to know before we can even get into start doing real quest design and stuff. And so keep that in mind when you're doing quests and things like that you really have to have a pretty good sense for what the game is and what the level is and things like that before you can really dive into this. And so be very careful about how much work, if you're designing a game, like how much work do you do now, on this area, or how much do you kind of wait and kind of rough out some stuff and get some ideas for what would be cool, both visually or in gameplay. And then you can work some of that back into your game designs and into your system designs, right? But that's definitely a big problem that a lot of designers face, is they might start to jump into this stuff a little too quick. So let me talk really quick before we get into this I want to talk a little bit about, because we're talking about the writers, the quest designers, the narrative designers, and all those roles, and kind of how those all kind of overlap. And so it's important to kind of understand in stories and storytelling, which is a big focus for what we're talking about today, how, as a quest designer, I'll call myself today a quest designer because that's what we're focused on more than being a level designer per se, at least in today's conversation. So if I'm a quest designer and I'm designing these quests, like, what do I do versus what does a writer do versus maybe what does the creative director do, right? There's multiple people there that get involved in story, right? And again, even the artists are involved at some level, in the story, right? But what is what are we doing in stories, in games, and how these kind of work together? So to give you kind of a high level idea is, a creative director is going to be usually, now that could be coming from a writer or whatever, but I would say that 75% or more of the creative directors I've worked with and know well come from fairly strong story backgrounds. Like there are people like myself that have a strong writing background and have some knowledge of that and at least consider themselves good or bad. I don't know if they're good or bad writers, but they consider themselves at least good writers. and that doesn't mean that they don't have a writer on the team, but they're the visionary, right? They're the person who comes up with the concept for the story, and they're coming up with that high level, that mile high view, right? Now, some creative directors may be a guy that can take that all the way down, and do an incredible job, at writing the dialogue all the way down the chain, right? Some CEOs of some companies are incredibly big writers and came from, writing and quest design type backgrounds. And so, you never know kind of who's going to be involved in your projects, right? But generally there's going to be a writer who kind of comes up with the concept of what that thing is going to be. And so that's kind of that mile high level. And then that gets broken down, that the big arcs and the big, the world building side of those things is all sort of done. And then at some point that's broken down into a level, and that level is going to be given a chunk of like, okay, here's the story that this level, needs to be covering, right? This level might be about killing a boss, right? Something really simple, at least at a mile high view, although we all know that can get really complicated, right? And that, and this level might be 1 hour of gameplay. It might be, 4 or 5. It just depends on the scale of your game. All right. And so you as a quest designer, as a level designer, are quite often handed some chunk of the story that you're kind of responsible for. And again, that may be given to you in a massive tome of like, here's the big story that we've written, that's dozens or hundreds even, hopefully not, of pages long, of here's the story, of what you've got to work with, and here's what you're doing. And then the writer may or may not have, have written, some of that. So creative director may have done a lot of the high level story. A writer may come in and flesh that all out into kind of, here's the chapters again, or the episodes. If you think about like a TV series or whatever, right? And you're just doing one of these episodes. So you get kind of a high level overview of what that episode is and what's going to happen there. Kill the warlord, right? Now, you as a quest designer, or a narrative designer, are the person who now needs to ensure that high-level arc of the story is being cared for, but you're also that person that's going to start adding in like subplots and start adding things. Because, for example, even the gameplay and the fun of like killing that boss in that fight could be really simple. It may or may not be a really hard, elaborate boss fight, with something sort of crazy, and you've got to fill in, an hour or two of gameplay in there, and you got to make that fun and like, okay, so what else is going on here, right? And so you may be able to have permission just to throw in some little side quests, some little things like, it literally could be that there's a linear path, going down the middle of the map with little, jaunts that go off, and each one of those could just be little things to go explore, and you run into some old lady and she's like, save my cat from the tree over here, and if you do, I'll bake you some cookies, and and you're like, ooh, I like cookies, and so you go do that quest because you want some cookies, right? And they could just be minor rewards that you do for fun. They could be pretty good rewards to level you up, or you get a new sword, or you make a new friend, or whatever those things are to drive you forward. They have nothing to do with the warlord. They're either just strengthening me up. Again, that emergent systemic gameplay that we talked about in the beginning, it's kind of related to that. Like, what do I do when I'm not on a quest, right? Or how do I add quests that are kind of systemic, meaning they're things that I can just sort of do if I feel like it, and these may be optional. So one person may be able to speed run right through the level, avoid all the side quests and avoid all that other stuff, go right through the game and go kill the boss and get in and out of that level in 15 minutes. And we may not stop him from doing that. We may let him do that. But why would a player not do that? Well, think about it. If I go running through anywhere, what am I doing? I'm not picking up everything. I'm not, leveling myself up. I'm not generating extra XP or rewards. I'm not getting all the, the other gifts or money or whatever it is, right? There's going to be things that I do as a player that make me better, right, in some way, shape, or form, usually in a game. And that's the reason, the intrinsic motivation for maybe half the players, that they're going to go through and take their time and do every little tiny thing because they want to see the whole game, they want to experience the whole game, and they just like the game, right? So they're gonna try and do everything in it as much as they can. And they may skip something or miss something occasionally, but they are doing a lot of that. Another player may be really strong already. Maybe he's been doing everything and he's just like, I hate this level. I don't like it. I just want to get to the end of the game or whatever, and I'm going to blow through this as fast as I can. We may or may not stop him. But by the time he gets to that boss, for example, at the end of the level, he's got a kill. That guy may have some special shield or some special thing, that protects him. And, unless I do all those extra little side quests and get, a special weapon on this level, then, I may not be able to kill him very easily, if at all, right? And so a lot of these quests and a lot of these things that are happening in these stories that are there are better if they interrelate to the final objective, right? You want these things in that perfect best case scenario to be somewhat, some little random things that I can do just because it interests me. And then some things, that make me stronger, make me better, and make the end goal for that level easier to do and not as complicated, right? And so you really want to think through that before you get started about is this going to be just this whole one big, think about the Lord of the Rings movies, right? In the trilogy, and it's literally like the storyline is 3 movies long, and in movie hours, those were epic movies at 3 hours each, whatever. So you're talking about like the trilogy, and that journey they went on was whatever 9 hours of movie time, but took place. But it was, yes, there was some little side quests and some bad things happen and some stuff that takes you off, kilter. But for the most part, they were on that whole journey, right? And they didn't deviate and be like, hey, let's go to grandma's and have cake tonight, and it's your birthday, let's go party. That's not what they did. They were focused on that stuff. But yes, occasionally they got chased or they got pushed or an accident, bad thing happened that, they got captured and taken over here or whatever, right? And so as we're on this journey in these stories can both push us and pull us in different directions. And so as a quest designer and in our stories, we're thinking about okay, how do we push the player, right? So pushing the player is what? We're going to force him to go in a direction, right? Or heavily encourage him. Maybe he's got an option. Maybe he can go left or right. But maybe it's there's some bad guys maybe coming here and literally they're moving at you. And if you don't keep moving out of their way, you're going to die, right? That's pushing somebody, right? So we're going to kind of directly or indirectly encourage them or force them to go someplace we want them to go, to do something we want them to do. Pulling somebody somewhere is it's dangling the carrot, right? So the carrot's here, and ooh, look at this reward. It's really nice. It's very yummy cookies. You're going to like these cookies. And you're like, ooh, I love cookies. And so you go down and do that thing because, you're being pulled down that direction, right? The gingerbread house is somewhere down the path, and you want to go to it. And so as a quest designer, you want to use both techniques, right? There's times that we want the journey often to feel like it's this easy linear journey, but we can use pushing and pulling to distract you for a while, to force you in other ways. You think and you look on the map and you go, hey, I can go from point A to point B, and this is just it's 5 miles, and I think that's all I got to do, right? But there's a river and a bridge, and I get to the bridge and the bridge is out. Oh no, okay. I guess I'm going around the long way, right? And then that's an example of a bad thing happens, right? The bridge, is out. And so, you can do things like that to we'll call it complicate your quests, right? To make them more interesting, to make the stories, have more stuff. But what seems like something obvious on the surface doesn't have to be what your thing is really about, right? And so if you think about that, again, that simple quest of hey, go kill this guy, right? And you think oh, that's easy. Down the path, kill him, boom, he's dead, game over, I win. And then you get halfway down the path, the bridge is out. Okay, that's not so good. Okay, well, let me go down to where I think I can cross the river here, and then, oh man, monsters, and I'm running away. And then, next thing I'm many miles downriver, and then the rainstorm hits, and now I'm trudging through the rainstorm, and and it's just like one thing after another can happen that deviates something, and then maybe I'm in a party and one of my a group, not a social party, but I'm in a group, and in that group, somebody gets kidnapped, right? Or somebody gets taken by the police or the bad guy or whatever, and they're taken somewhere else, and I need to go retrieve him or the item or the object. And so you can see how, like, even in a single quest, you can make things a lot more complicated than they initially seem. And so as you're building up what your quest is, you have to be thinking about that. It's not just as simple as like go kill these 10 things and then boom, you're done, and go collect 5 of these and you're done. I mean, yes, a very, 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 very basic, if you're a beginner, junior game designer, and you have a simple game and you want your quest to be that simple, yes, you can do that, right? But today we're going to try and encourage you a little bit of like, how do you make great quests, right? Hi, Abram. Nice to meet you too. Thanks for joining us today. So, now, something else is kind of a related topic that I want to mention is that sometimes the way you also want to be thinking about quests are there's the kind of the beginning, what we'll call it, the middle, and the end, right? Now, sometimes the middle and the end, or any of those can be really close to each other, like talking physical location. Sometimes they can be very far away. And so, and again, things don't always have to be, and shouldn't always be, and shouldn't usually be, on surface exactly how they come across, right? So again, let's just say that, your quest is to go kill somebody. Again, what seems like a very, very simple quest. So I go through the world, and I got to fight some things, and it's not the easiest route, but, it's relatively simple. It takes me, 10 minutes to run over there, get through the dungeon a little bit. I get to the bad guy, and I kill him, and I'm like, yay, like that was an easy quest, cool. But then I gotta like, get something from the guy and bring it back to the guy that, that gave me the quest, right? So I pick up the item and think, oh, this is easy. I got 5 minutes and I'll be back there and get my reward, right? I get this cool sword and this is so easy, so cool. And then suddenly, everything bad happens, and then, as soon as you kill the boss, all of his minions get really pissed off, and suddenly now, 10 times more guys that were there that weren't there in the beginning suddenly descend on you, right? And suddenly just wave after wave of all these bad things just start plummeting down on top of you, and suddenly what you thought was just going to be a simple extraction, meaning getting yourself from the end point back to the beginning, what you thought was going to be really easy suddenly could just turn into a nightmare, right? And be like crazy hard. So again, when you're designing these quests, think outside the box and use story and use gameplay mechanics and stuff to really figure out what kind of quests that you can make. Now, let's talk a little about the types of quests. Now, the something to also kind of keep in mind is that from a production standpoint, making quests and all that is pretty hard. And there's a certain amount that you can do through scripting and stuff as a quest designer. But there's a certain amount that also just needs new like programming stuff, new content, new something to make it work, right? And so I want to warn you guys here is that this becomes a point of contention for a lot of people. Quest designers and level designers in general have a very bad tendency to always want something new. They don't know how to reuse things, and so many times. I mean, like every project, and we're talking about even professional designers have been doing this for 20 years. They still think this way, and that they just think that more is better, right? And that they have to have some kind of new gameplay mechanic to use in this quest. They got to have some new location for the quest. They've got to have some new characters. They got to have new this, new that, and suddenly it's, many man months of work just to try to give them all the stuff so they can implement their quest. And I want you to think about that and be very aware of that if you ever get into becoming a quest designer, a level designer, and that, yes, there's a certain amount that new is good, but you need to be very sparing with what, that is. And so as a general rule, just kind of, my personal thing is generally I don't allow my designers to ask for more than 3 or 4 new things on a level. So they can have a new mechanic. For example, an example of a mechanic. Like, let's say they want a swinging bridge, rope bridge that can be destroyed. And so as the characters walk across the bridge, it's going to swing and it kind of moves around. And then if they do too much, the whole bridge, breaks. Or if they use their weapon on it, the bridge can break, and it falls and it collapses with all this animation and things like that. Now, that bridge might be really important, like in Indiana Jones or some show. That bridge could be very important to your story. It could be an important plot device, things like that. So I'm not saying don't do the bridge, but just use that as an example of, like, if you have to build this really custom, it's a custom art asset. I need the bridge itself. It needs custom physics. It needs custom particle effects when it blows, up, or it's destructible. And so it needs art assets. It needs programming. It needs animation, it needs effects, it needs new audio, and so when you start looking at all that stuff, you're like, ooh, that one bridge was a lot of work, right? And it was not trivial. And I've seen, quest designers that will literally ask for like 50 new things on a level, and you're like, dude, like, no, like, get 5, maybe 3, but don't ask for 50 new things, right? And so the types of quests that you ask for and the types of quests that you design for, you need to try and have some understanding of and methodology for your production, right? You need to be able to look at that and understand kind of like what's easy, what's hard, and what is what's going to be fun, but also plausible to do in the production time you have, right? And so where I'm going with this is that you want to think about the quests and the components as these very modular pieces, and how do you reuse those as much as possible? And so I like to break my types of quests into different things that are more easily understood, but also more easily like defined, so that those encompass the same base sets of mechanics. But then I try to embrace the, like, okay, now how do I mix and match? How do I combine these things together and do this thing and do that thing to make more innovation and make it feel like between that and I go to different locations, different times of day, different types of enemies, and you start combining all these things together in kind of slightly new ways, right? Then you can get lots and lots of variety for more, as we say, bang for our buck, right? We can do those things a little faster, do those things a little cheaper, and that's the job of a level designer and a quest designer. And so you need to be very cognizant of that, because one of the things you don't realize, in most games, this is one of the problems with, to another sidebar here, another problem with being a quest designer is you're often either the last person in or the second to last person in on the game, in the production pipeline. So there's this huge snowball coming down at you, right, of all these things that need to happen before you can start your job. And so in the very beginning of a game, you might think like, oh, I got 12 months to build, 6 levels. So I got 2 months per level, to build each one of these levels. Like, no problem. Like, this will be, that'll be easy. And that's about what, a typical game, 1 to 3 months maybe would be a typical production pipeline. So, but that's in that perfect world, right? And you're like, okay, but I need to have all the art done, I need to have the level kind of done, I need to have all these tools built, I need to have all this dialogue written, and the stories finished out, and the enemies need to all be designed, and like all this stuff has to happen before you, as a level designer, as a quest designer, can go assemble it and then actually start making something playable and fun. And so you have this codependency quite often. Now, some teams are trying to figure out how to get around some of that. I'm not going to get into that today. That's a more complicated subject about how to break some of that codependency in level design and quest design. But quite often, you're like that last guy in, and you're trying to do a bunch of stuff while while you're waiting for these people before you can begin, and then quite often what ends up happening is they get delayed and they start shrinking. They take longer, and then you as a quest designer almost always end up having to do your job in a lot less time than you thought you had, and you end up having to cut a lot of corners and things because your start time gets delayed by that codependency. And so that's another important thing for you to kind of figure out. So where I'm going with that is the more things that you need that are new, the more things that you ask for, the more original stuff that you require in order to build your level, to build your quests, the more that you could end up hurting yourself by, again, increasing that codependency there, and therefore you're waiting and waiting and waiting, and they're going longer, and you're like, oh crap, I had 2 months, and now I got 6 weeks, and then I got 4 weeks, and now I got 2 weeks, and we're cutting that level, and that's such a common problem. And so, in that perfect world, again, a level could take you several months to build. Not talking just all the quests, but talking, generally it would take a couple months to build build out a full level, put all the quests in, get it all working, properly and stuff. But on some games, if you know what you're doing, you can build them a lot faster. On Munch's Odyssey, when I was working on that, I had to. It's a long story. We had to throw out a bunch of the levels and rebuild them all at the last minute because we had a lot of technology changes and memory changes on the Xbox platform. And I think we ended up redoing most of the levels in about 2 days. Start to finish, concept to complete in roughly 2 days. Those were probably 20-hour days, but still, really, 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 really hard. And we got lucky more than we did. It was a little bit of skill, a lot of luck to get the game done, in the time we had. But again, so process and how we build your levels and all that is really important to understand. But the process can only go so far. It is because not if, but when it's going to really hit the fan, and you're going to get, and get stuck into a lot of these things. You need to be, aware of these codependencies, right? Because every project I've ever worked on has had a lot of problems with level design and and the quest designers, being the last ones in, and your time always gets cut short, and it's really hard. And so again, the more that you plan here, you have to be very careful. One last note on that is when you're doing story, and again, so your job as a quest designer is to write these micro stories, right? To write all these little subplots, to write all this little small thing, and ultimately you are yourself or working with usually your writer to write all the dialogue, all the conversations, and most of those revolve around the quests and what you're doing in the world, and that's what your job is, right? So you got all this big snowball coming down the hill that's delaying everything because you can't really quite get started until a certain amount works. So your time is getting compressed this way. On the other side, your time also gets compressed and it's not very flexible because especially if your game needs to be localized and if you've got a game with 20,000 or more lines of dialogue. It's a nightmare to localize that into multiple languages. And if you have to launch in multiple languages, not only do you have to get the text translated, but if you have VO in your game, and if all of your text is also done with VO, there could be months and months and months and months of time needed to get all that VO recorded and localized and translated and everything else related to that. And so that's also been a nightmare on pretty much every project I've ever worked on. Again, in that our time is getting compressed. We're trying to we keep trying to make the stories and the quests really fun, and that means we have to keep tweaking them and keep adjusting them. And that quest didn't quite work, so we're going to cut it and we're going to change this other quest. But by doing that, it makes sense, but we don't maybe have time to translate the text. And what do we do? And we're constantly battling this time pressure of getting this immense amount of dialogue, which is typical, like in, say, an RPG, to get that done, and then also trying to get it translated and stuff. And so just be aware of when you're a quest designer, you're getting squeezed on both sides, and there's two problems. And that, yes, you can implement some of the more technical side of a quest later, But again, talking today about a quest designer as a storyteller, and you're that one that's just you just keep trying to tweak the story, trying to make it all make sense and make it fun, and and you're trying to balance all that together, and it's really bloody hard. And then when people are telling you like you got to be done by tomorrow because some translators got to have 6 weeks to to translate all of the text, and even if you're doing pickups and re-records and you're fixing problems later, there's still this hard cutoff that that affects you in your storytelling. And so just be aware of that you don't always have the same deadline that you might in your mind think like, oh, the game's got 5 months to launch, so I got plenty of time. Like, what do I have to worry about? Well, make sure with your producers, like if you're doing a lot of story and stuff, and especially if you're going to have a writer go back and say polish all the dialogue that you're doing. So you might take a first pass in your quest for the dialogue that you want, because he has to know like what's this conversation even about. So you might write the quick first pass of blah 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 and yada 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 and blah 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 and back and forth, and then a writer comes in and and now has to polish it. Well, that writer takes time, right? And just all that stuff takes time. And so the amount of time that you're going to be given to create your quests and to create your levels shrinks down a lot faster than you realize. And so make sure you're very aware of that, especially if you're new into quest design, and try to understand that. Hi, Sushi Draws. Welcome to the channel. So real quick, one of the things I want to talk about before we get more into, sorry, we're going all over today, but hopefully you guys are enjoying the ramblings about quests and level design. This is I'm kind of just giving you guys a high level overview. This is something I could teach an entire course on and still not cover properly. This is a very complicated thing. As a quick reminder, again, I'm on episode 48 today or 49, and and we're quite a few of my previous episodes talked about world building and other topics that are all related to creative direction, world building, writing, and things like that. So if this is a topic that's interesting to you and you're new to my channel, please go check out all those previous videos. There's a lot of extra help there, lots of ideation around like how do you bring all these things together, right? And that's why this is so hard. This is not. And it's what's interesting is most level designers or quest designers are often, for a lot of teams at least, considered entry level. Like that's that first job you kind of get in a lot of game teams is a level designer, as a game designer, and then quite often you work there for a little while and then eventually become a system designer or something, because that's technically sometimes a little bit harder. And but the irony of it is in many ways, the level designer is one of the harder jobs because you have to put so many things together, right? You gotta be able to understand, all the gameplay systems, all of the level design itself, and art, and story, and even the audio, and like just everything comes together, because this is where it all gets assembled, right? This is the final product that the consumer sees. So that's why you do really have to have a very broad depth of knowledge if you want to be a great level designer. So now one of the things I want to talk about, one last thing before we jump into types of quests, is to understand what is a quest, not from a player's perspective, but from a game designer's perspective, right? One of the reasons that quests are tricky, and then why MMO quest designs are even harder, is that when you initiate a quest, first of all, you can't break the game, right? So we are, as game developers, never, ever, ever allowed to do something that would cause the player to basically, hurt himself in the way, meaning like, that the quest is uncompletable, and therefore the game literally can't progress, right? There always has to be something there that basically keeps the player from doing something bad, knowingly or unknowingly, right? So let me give you a quick example. Let's just say that I have a very simple quest that I need to go kill 4 lions, in some area, right? And it tells me to go kill these 4 lions, and that's my quest. And so I think like, okay, great, really simple. I go over there, and I kill lions 1, then 2, then 3, and then wait, where's number 4 at? Well, I happened to be wandering through that area earlier in the game, and I saw a lion and I killed it, And so now there was only 3 lions there, but my quest, when it started, told me to kill 4, and that quest cannot complete until I kill 4, but there's only three lions currently there, right? So one of the things that quests always have to do, when a quest is started, it has to determine that all of the conditions within that quest can be met by the player currently, or have to be things that are on spawners that it might require a bit of a wait, but it is completable, right? Give me an example real quick of that. So let's, in the case of the lion, you see this in MMOs quite a bit, but in RPGs and stuff in general, just to solve this exact problem, what'll happen is if you take on a quest so in a single player game, if you take on a quest, to kill the 4 lions, the game has to go do a quick check and make sure there's 4 lions there, or it has those 4 specific lions. And if one of them or more are dead, the game will go respawn those lions and make sure that there's now currently 4 lions in the game, to make sure that you're not going to fail this quest and how to do it. And so then in an MMO, they might do similar things, and you can sometimes see this in WoW or other games where there'd be like this line of people waiting basically next to like a spawn location, and there might be a lion there that spawns every 5 minutes, and there's like literally a queue of people, and the first guy in line, as soon as that lion spawns, he kills it to complete his quest, and then he runs off, and then the next guy waits, and the next guy waits, and it's hilarious, kind of sad that we're designing that way, but that's the way they do it, because they need to complete a quest that's killing X number of things, but in a MMO world environment, that gets exponentially more complicated. So, from a game designer's perspective, a quest is something that has to be, initiated to the player, given to the player. So there has to be a quest giver or something. Now that quest giver could be something that is, a AI, person that's in the game that the player never sees. It could just be spawned off of, player locations, player actions, whatever it is. It could be the voice on the radio, whatever that is. So the quest giver could be more of a system, a UI interface in the game. But there's something in the game that has to trigger that. There's a condition. I complete one quest, it starts the next one, or whatever that is, right? I enter an area, it starts the quest. So this thing could just be automatically given to the player based on some sort of conditions being met, because you don't want to just throw like everything at the player. So there's often that quest giver again, whether that is a physical entity in the game. That thing could be a message board, and I go up to a board and, I can choose which quest I want off of a board. It could be a person I talk to. It could be a book that I read, whatever that is, right? There is something there that initiates the quest. Now, on initiation, again, if the player usually has to accept that quest, or if it's given to him again, that if that quest is active, the game needs to constantly be aware of what is needed to complete that quest, and whether those are things to kill, things to pick up, things to do. All those things have to always exist, so the player again can never fail, right? And that's something that's really, really important. And so now you have also in some games, the necessity that some games only allow you to have a couple quests going at any one time, and so you might even have the choice of like stopping one quest, and make it inactive, so that now I can take on another quest that maybe I want to do in the meantime, and that whole system can get really messy. So just be aware of that whole, like, how many quests do I have? Which ones am I currently doing? Which ones have I finished? And there's a bunch of potential UI around those kind of things. We're not going to dive into that today, but just be aware of that can get a little bit messy on kind of like what am I currently working on, or what can I currently work on, and what can trigger, because again, there may, like a boss or something like that may not even initiate into the world until I actually start the kill the boss quest, and then suddenly now he runs in, spawns in, flies in, does whatever he's going to do, but he's not even there. So if I just was able to run around the world and get over to a location, that guy may not even be there until, I want him to be there, right? So there's a bunch of stuff like that to take into consideration. Hey, Han. Yeah, exactly. Lion 4 fell through the world. No killer respawn trigger for the lion. Quest thinks lion is still there, but player fails. Yep. So true. Yeah, there's a million things like that, from a bug to just, players doing stupid things, or whatever, right? Like, same thing, like, I'm battling a lion and I use a weapon that has knockback, and I knock him off a hill and the lion goes flying down to a part of the world that I can't get to. And he's still technically alive, but now I can't reach the lion, and now it's a game failure state, right? It's the same thing, whether that was a bug, falling through the collision, or me knocking him into an area, or doing other things. Again, it's just, there's a million bugs like that we have to test for, check for, but, it does happen a lot. So then, when we get into a quest, there's going to be, as a game designer again, all those things that, what are we going to do during a quest, right? And those could be lots of different things, from, pick up, deliver, kill, heal, whatever that is. And we'll get into that just in a minute. But there's kind of all these things of what we do. And it could be a combination of all those. And there could be things that the implicit instructions, meaning the things that I have to do. And then there's the things that, that aren't written down, but you're going to have to do in order. So, for example, to fight the boss might be in a room that's behind a locked door. And so do you tell the player, go find the key, unlock the door, and then get into the room to fight the boss? Or do you just tell them, go kill the boss, and then the player eventually gets to the door and is like, oh, the door's locked. So, okay, now I got another little sub-quest to go over and find a key. And that could be 5 seconds, that could be 5 hours or 5 minutes or whatever, And so, again, when you're building a quest out, you don't necessarily always want to hold their hand and say, like, do A, then B, then C, then D, then E, then F, and, don't forget to blow your nose and wash your hands, okay? And it's, there's a certain amount of hand-holding we want to do, and there's a certain amount of, like, you go figure it out. You'll get credit for that end result, and maybe there's a couple ways to get that end result, right? So this is you as a quest designer figuring out what do you want to do in the game, right? How do you want them to have, what kind of quests do you want them to do? Is it going to be linear and really straightforward? Is it a really simple quest that's for kids? Is this a really complex, for a level 50 high-level character, who's been playing the game for 20 hours and he knows what he's doing and he's got a high-level character, and he's very powerful, right? Who is this quest for, right? You got to ask yourself, again, what's the target audience for this thing, and make sure that you're aligning with, where the player is in his progression in the game even and all that. That's a whole other, topic. So, and then, we complete the quest, and that completion, again, doesn't necessarily mean that that you instantly get the credit. So quite often, for example, again, I might kill the guy, I might kill the boss, and the game records, that I killed him, but I might still have to come back now and collect the reward, or whatever analogy you want to call it. So I might have to go back to somebody and say, like, hey, I killed the guy for you to get my reward. So there's a reward cycle. So part of it in the very beginning of what you also need to do is define what is the player going to get, for that, and what are we also going to spawn object-wise and stuff along the way too. So not only do you have to make sure that maybe the lions are spawning, but maybe the lions, you need a bow and arrow maybe to do it, or you need something special, or the boss fight needs some special things. So there could be object states, world states. Maybe it's a nighttime thing. Maybe like when I start the quest, it instantly makes it nighttime, and it fast forwards time of day, because it's like you want the quest to happen at nighttime. Any kind of world events, environmental events, world objects, you could give the player even a special weapon, like, hey, go kill the boss. And hey, by the way, here's a cool sword to go do it with, right? Like, use this sword to go kill the guy. So there's no limits there on the things that you need to check for and make sure. And then the other thing real quick to know is, like, any of those objects, whether they are given to the player to complete a quest, or they're given like an object to pick up, like when he completes the quest, right? So let's just say again that I need the head of the guy after I kill him. gruesome, I know. Sorry. So I go kill him. I get that part, and it goes into my inventory. Well, another way my player could screw himself is like this thing's in his inventory. If I can just take it out of my inventory and throw it out, not knowing what it was, and then 30 minutes later when I go to complete the quest, the guy's like, "What are you talking about? You haven't killed the guy." And you're like, "Yeah, I killed him," but you lost the head, right? And now, so typically those types of items need to be locked, in inventory, but they're not using the same inventory system that everything else in your game is doing, so that you have the ability to not lose them and not screw yourself again, as a player. And these are all things that you need to be thinking through, as the game progresses, right? And you need to be thinking through, like, how's the player not stick himself, into a big mess. All right, Hans. So if you design a quest and the tool set doesn't accommodate for what you want to design, does that usually need to be defined before the design starts, or is it common to add stuff later as well? It really depends on the team, the game, and the complexity of what you need. So whether you are needing a special item to a special game mechanic, like for example, I want to have a door that unlocks a certain way, or I want to have whatever, or something that just requires a little bit of code. Like maybe we already have keys, but I want a special key, that's unique for some reason, or I want to have a punch code with a number in it or something. So if it's just a variation of that, like probably not too hard, that could be added a little bit later. But if it requires like a whole new set of tools and a whole new thing, and if that thing is only used for that one quest, then your chances of success, i.e. getting your team willing and having the time and resources to do that, starts to shrink down considerably. Now, if you can think through like more ways of reusing this thing, so if this becomes a tool in a way that you can do like really interesting stuff all the time and enhance the whole game, then that's something you probably need to know earlier than later, but not necessarily, it might be something you don't realize till a little bit later. So I would say that, mid-game you might know more about a level and request a few new things. But you do want to be thinking through some of that stuff sooner than later. But again, until you actually like touch it and feel it, you don't always know a lot of things. And so that's the thing, is you got to find that delicate balance of like, what kinds of new things can I request and ask for after I've kind of realized this thing wasn't as fun as I wanted it to be, right? But for example, let's just say that you wanted to have the ability, if I'm going into a room and I want to have a enemy set up where, I've got enemies that are spawning, but I don't want them just to, like old school boink, 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 and just appearing right in front of me, right? So I want to have enemies that spawn off camera, and can run in, and attack the player, and look like they kind of ran in from off screen. And I want to have characters that can climb on the walls and climb on the ceiling and whatever. And that's going to require like a whole new system for like AI pathfinding, for animation, movement, like all that kind of stuff. Like that's the kind of system. If you just wanted that for like one part of the game, just one moment in the game, probably not going to get it, right? Now, maybe there's a way to fake it, till you make it, right? There's a lot of tricks that we will do. In fact, a lot of like level design is really about, it's kind of like akin to Hollywood a lot, right? Where you're going to build a facade, right? And it's just like, on the surface it looks real, but don't peek behind the curtain, so to speak, right? Because there's other stuff sort of going on behind the curtain. And so, as level designers, we have to get really good at like, making people think that there's other things going on, making people think that the AI, say, is more intelligent than it really is, or whatever, because we may do lots of little tricks, and it may be really brute force by us, just like doing things the hard way. But it really just depends on the game and the mechanics. But again, the more that you can use the existing mechanics, the better it is. But I know, like, one of our mentors, Andres, he's the lead level designer at Ubisoft and was working on the latest Far Cry game. And I know he was recently telling me a story about, there was one village that he was scripting, and with an open world game, the player could come in from any direction. So it was really hard because they wanted the player to see these really, bad atrocities that the enemy NPCs were supposed to be killing a bunch of like women and children, but you needed, as the player, from the story perspective, you needed to elicit emotion, right? You need to see these guys, killing the women and children, doing these really bad things, so that you would really like be angry and stuff, and that was really important to the story. But when you didn't see where they were coming from, I just like they tried to kind of create like a custom tool, that was going to allow them to sort of script these things, and it just never worked. And in the end, he just used a simple system of bounty boxes, basically, of is the player in a location. So from a top down, like where is he located? So if he's in this box, right, and then they used a look at command. So they also had a secondary look at command. So basically, is the player in this location, and then is he looking in this direction, and if so, trigger event. Right, and so these are probably two of the most common tools that we use as like level designers. And yes, as quest designers as well. But it's the kind of thing where, again, like, is the player somewhere, trigger something, or is the player somewhere and looking at something? Right? Do I want him to be looking over here so he sees the explosion happen, he sees the big event, and he gets scared or he gets like whatever, right? But this is another common problem. I could be here, but looking this way, and then I don't even see the person die, and I turn around and they're already gone, and you just totally missed it, right? So the look at can also be really important in first person games or a command of on camera. So even if it's a top down or third person game, basically it's just like, can the player see this right now, right? Is he within a certain distance, within a certain range? But in the case of like Andres with his Far Cry level, it was really, really hard because, for every one of those encounters, I think he had to put in like 5 or 10 different, like wherever there was a path coming down, wherever there was something happening, he had to make sure that he had an event that would trigger this whole thing. And so it ended up taking him a really long time to script this whole thing, but he was able to do it with existing tools and not have to ask for an extra tool, if that makes sense. So Alexios says, yeah, it's best when the quest items do not follow the restrictions and the rules of normal inventory. Yeah, it's not. I would say it's actually usually required. If it's an item that's given to you just to use for your own sake, yeah, they can sell it, they can give it away, they can drop it, whatever. If it's required, as long as it's required to be part of completing a quest, it needs to be locked or it needs to be hidden or whatever, just so the players can't do something bad with it. So, anyways, let me talk real quick about the types of quests. Now, we talked about this a little bit of just kind of like who's giving you the quest, right? And so that's, again, that first thing that you need to sort of be aware of. So again, like, where do I get the quest, right? Where is that quest coming from? Where is that quest, going to initiate itself, right? And so again, there's no right or wrong answers. Like every IP, every game, everything's going to have a different place these things are coming from. And then you need to be kind of aware of these locations. And again, a lot of this also needs to be very consistent for the player. So and there may be different types of quests, different levels of quests. So right now I've been just using the phrase quest, but really there's an unlimited number of ways you can categorize things. And so what's important is that the player sort of understands what these things are. And so sometimes we might refer to them like, let's just, the next common reference might be, say, a primary quest and a secondary quest, right? And so primary quests the players would learn are things that are required, and I literally cannot progress the game until I do the primary quests, and literally I may not, that they may be, absolutely 100% required or mostly required or whatever, highly recommended at least, kind of thing. Secondary quests might be, and again, this is for you as a designer to decide, but it's important from the player's perspective to understand, what do I have to do? What should I probably do? And what can I optionally do, right? What are the things that just are there kind of for fun? And and how you define those can be really important in the game as well. And so, again, there can be lots and lots of things that are important for you to define so that players understand, kind of the risk reward. Are these things needed or not? All that kind of stuff. Because players may be, again, wanting to move through the game a little faster. They may be really strong and not caring about secondary quests or whatever the case is. So having a terminology and a language around that, right? Some games might also give out, things that are what I consider a more emergent quest, and those are important to kind of understand. In some games, like I might call those a mission, right, versus a quest. And you might have quests and missions in the same game, but again, this is just language for the player. But quite often, like in some of my past games, like a mission would be something that's, very systemic, meaning like go kill 10 things here, go, capture this guy, go, do something that, again, makes sense in the universe of like who you are, right? So if I was a bounty hunter, I might have, if I'm playing as Boba Fett, there might be a whole bunch of missions that I can get that are just about me doing my day job, right? These are not related to story. They have no story in them. They're just go do some things, and that could be deliver a bunch of items. It could be delivery quests. It could be, whatever, fetch quests. I mean, there's lots of things there that those things could be, but they're designed to have no story in them. And then, but other quests, are going to be the more designer-driven, designer-created, kinds of quests. And so those are going to have, their own thing, because they're a lot more, they take a lot more work to do, right? And that's something that's important to understand. We don't really have to talk about like team quests, when you get into like multiplayer games, when you get into co-op games, when you get into, MMOs and things like that. There can also be, things where, there's things that are designed for a team to do, like, so like a raid or equivalent of that, where a group of people are going to go on basically a quest together, right? And they're going to go, if you know and play MMOs and you think about like a World of Warcraft raid, you're really like, the raid might be to go kill that boss, and I'm going to go through a dungeon and I'm going to go fight, a bunch of, it could be PvP, it could be PvE, it might be a whole dungeon that I'm going to go through, with me and say 3 friends, and we're going to go through this whole dungeon and go kill the guy. And that's basically an emergent quest, what I was just calling like a mission, for example, where this dungeon raid is really going through and doing the same thing, and I might do it 10 times, but there's not really a story there, except for maybe like when I kill the final guy, maybe it triggers a new story sequence or something, but the ins and outs and all that of this thing aren't necessarily covered minute to minute, if that makes sense. So I want to point back to this again, and show you guys this. Let me pull this over a minute. All right. So again, for those of you that have joined us more recently, I put a link to this at the very top of the chat channel. Or if you can't find it later and you're watching this not live, DM me and I can send you a link, to this document. This is a 22-page document I wrote some time ago about making MMO levels better. But this had a lot of material in here that was really good about talking about, what do you need to do to build the levels. Whether you're building MMOs or single player, a lot of this stuff is still, it talks about like, what is in a level, right? From the concept art, asset lists, creating your rough maps, all the level. But you can see like here at the very bottom is like quest scripting, right? So that's, 10 out of 13 steps. So again, there's like a lot of codependency there where it's, you have to be really aware of that and be like, okay, I'm pretty far down that to-do list, right? So it's just something to be aware of. Another topic I talk about here, which is part of when we start talking about the quests in general and stuff, which is really, really important to think about in theory. And let's talk about this a little bit real quick, is repetition. So one of the things that can make and break a lot of games is repetition. And, I doing the same thing over and over and over and over, and, and you're like, okay, where am I at? Oh, I just killed another 100 enemies. Oh, I just, and if your quests, which are quite often the face of this repetition, are boring and repetitive, that's going to really, stand out. It's going to really show. So you can have the most interesting, minute-to-minute gameplay in the world. But again, if you just keep telling the guy, go kill this, go kill this, go kill this, after 25 hours of gameplay, he's going to be a little bit bored, right? And so the repetition within a quest is something that's really, really, really obvious to people, and is really something that I'd say most games still struggle with. This is definitely something that making really great quests is really hard. This is not easy. And MMOs and stuff suffer from this even more because of the sheer size and length and time of gameplay, right? So in a single player RPG, you might only play 10 hours, 20 hours, maybe as much as 50 or 100, but there's not, there's still a finite amount of time that you're playing, this game, versus, in an MMO, you might be playing this game for 10 years, right? And be playing it, 10 hours every week or whatever. And so it gets really hard to keep making these things even more original. But what I'm kind of going back to is really getting you guys to think outside the box, right? To really think about, how do I combine and recombine and do new things and stuff without having to do a lot of extra work, if any extra work, right? Taking things, that recombination of stuff to try to minimize repetition. How do you, mix it up so that, I go kill somebody and then I fetch this thing and I go kill another person and then I go do something over here. How do I make these things more interesting, right? How do I make this stuff feel fun after hours and hours and hours and stuff? So that's something you need to be aware of. And so, there's a lot of art and skill into the repetition of these things, into minimizing repetition. And whether you're doing this in your quests or whether you're doing this in an action game or something like that, it's the same kind of idea, right? But, there's a lot of stuff there that you need to be aware of when it comes to how to minimize repetition in your game and your levels. And again, this is I can't tell you enough how hard this is and also how important it is. But again, especially when you're trying to not just add more new things, this gets harder and harder. And especially as features start getting cut, and the new mechanics start getting cut and your request for new things gets cut and you're like, my toolbox is getting really small, and I gotta make this thing fun, for hundreds of hours, and what do I do, right? And there's only so much that can keep it fun. So don't underestimate the challenge of minimizing repetition, but it is absolutely one of the most important things you need to do as a level designer. Lexios, the biggest success is when the combat system is so well designed, the flow feels so natural, very subjective, that repetition is actually not boring. Yes, no, absolutely. And so that's where your combat systems and things like that definitely are important, but you also have to remember that, again, it can be very subjective. And what you also have to remember is another little sidebar today. Let's talk about different player types, right? Who is your player, right? You need to first understand who your players are. What are they there to play your game like, right? And so, if you guys know who Bartel is, Bartel did a thing about player types. If you have not read his articles about the Bartel player types, here, let me put this in. Sorry. Actually, I'll pull it up really quick. And actually, as a quick aside as well, I believe that Richard put all this stuff up. He taught a whole class on player types. And this has been around for quite a while. And the guy, Richard Martell, who created this concept many years ago, went on. He lives in the UK. I can't remember the school. He teaches at a bigger university there. And he taught a whole class on this, like a pretty, like super extensive class on this. And he just recently released the whole class for free. And I forget all the nuances. It's on a weird site, but if you do a little bit, if this interests you a lot and you're interested in this thing, go check it out. And definitely, he's done some great work, even though it's a little bit older. It's still very relevant, and it's good to kind of understand. And so, go check it out. But again, if you want to look deeper, I know that just like some months ago, he just recently released all of his classes for free, which are really cool. And so, so that's important to understand. Lexio, so my experience minimizing gameplay downtime like combat, result screen and turn-based games, and making the combat more fast-paced can actually help a lot in making grinding less boring. Yeah, so in short, it's quite often about pacing, right? You know, you can't just have a fast-paced like combat game that just goes, whether you're pacing a movie, a story, you know, games, whatever, right? You need pacing and stuff to be up and down and all that, and that's what that's the short answer of why those other techniques and varying things up can actually make it more interesting, is that we need a change literally in our biochemistry as human beings to make that, you know, that be more fun and more interesting to us. So really quick, we're not going to dwell on this. This is a whole nother area. But again, knowing that there's killers, achievers, explorers, and socializers. Now, not every game is going to necessarily have all those. This was specific to MMOs. But what I'm getting at here is, who's your target audience? What do they want? What are they after? And recognize that there could be different player types. Even in a single-player RPG, you might have people that really love combat. You might have people that love exploration. You might have people that love stories, right? And so your game might actually have different paths and different things that keep people interested. And so if your missions and quests are all combat, like, and that's all they are, you know, the repetition is going to get in there, because you're like, okay, just fight, you know, and then, you know, the person who doesn't really like fighting very much is like, okay, I'm kind of bored here. Like, I was kind of hoping for some story, you know, and stuff, right? And so you need to understand who is your target audience, who are your player base, and then are you going to decide, you know, do you support each of them equally? Like, you know, if I'm building an MMO, do I do, you know, all four of these guys, they each get 25% of my attention as a level designer or as a quest designer? Or do I recognize that, like, okay, I'm going to give the killers, you know, this is often the easy approach, because combat is generally the easiest thing to put into a game. You know, once you have the base combat system working. Here's another variation on it here with explore, compete, collaborate, create. And again, these are important things to sort of understand. And so, but again, what this comes down to is, who are your players and what do they like to do, right? And so these are the things that, you know, these people, what is this guy doing? You know, they're viewing, they're collecting, they're voting, curating, reviewing. That may not be part of your game here, but, you know, they're competing, you know, they're doing stuff, they're creating things, they're collaborating. You know, again, there's different things that, you know, each one of these player types, again, is going to have different things in the game that they may like to do, right? And so just be aware of, you need to figure out for yourself, what does your game have in it, and what are the player types that you're going to have. And then part of the breaking up of repetition is recognizing that there's different player types and or just play experiences, right? So, for example, even if your game has, you know, if you've got combat and you've got, you know, more advanced movement, like parkour stuff. So, like, you could have action combat, action movement. You know, you can have quests and puzzles, you know, or puzzles, you know, there's kind of part of the stuff. You have stories. You can have all these things. So each one of those things is a different experience, right? And can have a whole different thing. But you need to kind of be aware of, again, like a killer, guy is not necessarily going to be killer could be a story person as well, but not always, right? And so, like, if you have these, like, lots and lots of quests where they're just super, look at a game like Disco Elysium or something like that, where, I mean, it's almost solid story, and, and for somebody that's a killer, their eyes are going to glaze over and be like, when do I get to fight again? Like, I just want to go kill something, and they can tolerate some level of story, but, but vice versa is true as well, right? If you just go kill for 5 hours and then have a little cutscene, the people interested in story are going to be bored and move on. So you need to understand who your players are, right? So again, this article's got a lot of things on improving quests, but what I wanted to come down to, hold on one second. Talking about spawners, talking about enemy introductions, like, how do enemies enter the scene, right? What are the things that are there around, enemies, even how they come into a scene and stuff. How are reinforcements done? And this could be, and keep in mind that a lot of these things are at several levels, right? A lot of these things are for the quest themselves, and also for potentially the game. And those things could be separated, and they could be kind of on that same path and one and the same, right? But don't assume that they're both the same. So, meaning, like, I might have more emergent systemic gameplay going on, and that if I'm in an area, there's just bad guys there, right? There could be monsters, creatures, whatever, and my job might be to kill the boss, but there might be 50 other guys in the area, and as I kill off these guys completely unrelated to my quest system, the game system just goes like, okay, when certain guys die, I got to respawn them, and I bring in reinforcements, and they just kind of keep the area. It keeps the area alive. Maybe once I kill everybody, maybe all that stops, and the area just goes empty, right? But do areas? Can I kill off everything in an area, and then nothing's there? Or do things keep respawning to an area? Right? These are design choices you have to make. But like in the game like Far Cry, for example, in that scenario, like what I was telling you with Andres, in his scenario, in that particular village, like he had helicopters that would come in and drop off whatever it was, 5 or 8 guys, I think at a time, as reinforcements. And so as the player was killing off guys, when it got to a certain amount of guys left in the village, it would trigger a helicopter. That helicopter would fly in, and then instead of just flying in and landing directly, the helicopter would actually circle once or twice around the village, which basically was warning the player, almost like a timer. It's warning the player, hey, something's happening, and then the helicopter would come and set down, and then guys would jump off and then come into the village and attack the player. And so again, that was a set of gameplay mechanics, game systems that were part of their living world, part of their open world, that were not tied directly to the quest, but that quest was taking place within this bigger world, so therefore you had to kind of deal with the stuff that was specifically around keeping that quest active and difficult, but also dealing with the stuff in the world itself, if that makes sense. All right. So here we kind of talked about, real quick too, I want to talk about quest chains. So another thing that's important to understand with quests is that they can also be chained together. So a quest chain would be a series of quests that are all kind of linked together and they all function together, generally one after another. So this might be the kind of thing where, for instance, that main thing where I got to kill the main boss. Well, I might first have to find his girlfriend and get her to tell me where he is, and then I have to go. But now, I can't get there because I need the passcode, and so now, so quest 1 is find the girlfriend. Quest 2 is get the passcode. Quest 3 is I need a disguise. Quest 4 is this, and so you can kind of baby step the player through it, and then each one of those quests, again, could be 5 to 20 minutes or more of time, and could have little subquests and could have all sorts of things, right? So those quests can have lots of different things to them, but but when they're tied together and they're linked together, we call them a quest chain. And so those are all things that are kind of interrelated. They could be dealing with the same people, the same area, the same conditions. They could be codependent on each other, and things like that. So that would be typically referred to as a quest chain if you hear that. Yeah, and again, like, having multiple paths. So this is an example of, again, how do we structure within a level. 1 second here. Somehow this got out of whack a little. Sorry, this image got a little bit out of whack, but you get the idea. So there was a quest 2 here, and then 12, 13, 14. There's another set of quests there, but you get the idea in that. So in this particular case, if this was an entire level, there is 17 quests within this one level, right? And then basically the player starts doing, so he starts and completes the first quest, and then it kind of opens up a little bit. And it's like he may know that there's these 6 quests next. He might know of 1 or 2 of them, and the other ones unlock, but basically then, he might have to he may have to complete all 6 quests or some number of them in order for quest 7 to unlock, right? And then at some point he's allowed to progress. But again, these don't necessarily have to allow for 100% completion here. But whatever you want, again, as a designer, he then goes to quest 7, and then that opens up 8, 9, 10, which then he goes to 11, and then 12 through 16, and then 17, right? So again, branching paths. But some of these could also be, little branching paths where, like, if I went from quest 1 to 3, quest 3 could unlock quest 8, which may or may not have backtracking, right? So that's something else you have to think about when you're doing your quest designs is, how open is your level, your world, and everything else, right? So again, there's no right or wrong answers here, guys. This is about what do you as a game designer want? What does your technology support? What makes sense in your game? And so, a level could literally be quest 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, in a perfectly linear fashion, both in 2 ways, or I should really say is that, that you literally have to do one quest to open the next, right? And then, but they literally could even be in physical space, literally linear. Like, I'm going down a dungeon, and the first quest is to kill sub-boss 1. So I go down the dungeon, I get to a special room, now I kill the sub-boss. Now I go down the next dungeon, kill sub-boss 2, down the next dungeon, and then kill the main boss, right? And those were literally done in sequence. I couldn't have deviated. There was no second paths, multiple paths, branching, anything. I'm literally going to do 1 through 3 because that's what the physicality of that allowed, versus like in an open world at the other extreme, I could have 3 quests on it, and I have to do 1 and then finish it, and then maybe go around the world, and then do 2 over here, finish it, then do 3 and finish it, right? But they're not physically necessarily joining spaces or something. So, but the point of a branching path is you got to be really careful, because what some games will do is they might go, say, from 1 to 3 to 8, but then if I make that choice and I go to 8, I can't go back to 7, and I can't go back to these other ones, and I just skipped a whole section of the game. And I didn't know it, maybe. Like, I've had that happen to me in games where I'm like, I literally progressed to a point, and they're like, no, you can't go backwards. And I'm like, but I missed all that stuff, and I literally have to restart the game. Another thing to know about that's also important, and this is where this is the harder gray area to deal with, is in like an RPG or strategy game or things like that, really kind of anything, we can potentially, I'm going to say, the player can potentially, kind of screw himself by not knowing how to build his character, his army, or what to do, right? And so, as an example of that, like, in an RPG where I have different character classes, I might, be building up really strong as like a swordsman, right? And I'm playing with my sword guy, and I'm building up my sword, and I'm like yeah, I'm the strongest, Conan the Barbarian swordsman that's ever existed, and I could literally be the best swordsman in the game ever. But then, we're doing this linear thing, and I get to like quest 11 here, and suddenly now, if I'm not a strong magician, I can't get through that quest, right? Suddenly it's like literally like to kill the bad guy, I have to use fireballs, and like I have like level 1 fireball, and I'm like, poof, like here bad guy, like take this, little puff. So anyways, that's another problem that you as quest designers need to understand, is that the codependency of the preconditions in a quest can get really challenging. And so that could be the player character's level, strength, XP, anything that he might need to even start the quest. So like he may not even have the ability to get to quest 11 unless he's at a certain minimum character level, right? And that could be okay, but like again, let's say that character blows through this and he goes 1, 3, 8 and gets to 11 and he misses all this stuff and he's only like level 5 and he's supposed to be level 50. Well, if he had done all this stuff, he would have been at level 50, and that's what you were counting on, but somehow he skipped ahead and he blew through, he did a speed run through and he gets there, and now he literally cannot complete that quest. He's not strong enough. There's no way for him to get through that. So he just screwed himself. Like that's a bad thing, right? And so you got to be careful. But that same thing could happen that if you had a dependency that said, well, I need the player, the player's level 50, so the quest initiates. The player is able to start the quest, but now the player doesn't have a certain skill, or he doesn't have a good enough skill, or the player doesn't have the best armor, or the player didn't buy the right weapon, or the player doesn't have this or that, and it gets really complicated, like really fast when you have to start realizing like, well, we're kind of guessing here. We're hoping that the player is going to be strong enough to take on this quest and have his own skill set good enough, and then as well as like having leveled up his character. But if the player doesn't know these things, he could easily like again configure himself as like the barbarian, and then suddenly you want him to be a magician, and he spent literally like in your tech tree or in your any of your character class setups, in your skill trees and things like that. That's why some RPGs will allow you to like sell things off and then like re-spend those points into other areas and stuff, or even be able to like take a really high level items and like craft, and use a crafting system to break them apart and then like build another item or buy another item or sell the item or whatever. Those are all systems that kind of have to be in place to protect the player from doing the wrong things knowingly or unknowingly, and then suddenly he gets far into a game and realizes he's not playing in the right way, and that's something that we have to be careful about, right? So just something there to be aware of. So again, there's lots of ways to set up your quest chains and things like that, but you need to be very cognizant of just how you're building out the quest for the entire level, because this is again a very complicated problem to have. Another quick note of this. So in games, whether they are single player, like Ratchet and Clank, to MMOs, quite often if you have the ability to revisit levels. So in Ratchet and Clank, we use a hub and spoke model. So basically, you could go to a planet, and then the planet's basically the hub. And then on a planet, there was multiple levels that you could, or multiple paths you could go down to accomplish. Well, on a path, there would be places and locations that you couldn't access yet when you first played through the game. So you might play through it and then look up and see like, oh wait, there's something way up here and I can see it, but I know I can't get to it yet. And you'd learn through playing the games like, oh, well, you're eventually going to get, say, the jetpack. And then the jetpack, once I have that, you're like, oh, wait, if I go back to level 3 and then like go halfway down that level, I can jetpack up there. There's a secret, right? There's something that's up there. There's a whole other thing. MMOs will do similar stuff where there might be, you play through a part of a level and then there's a gate that's there with maybe a guard, and it's like, oh, you're not allowed through here yet. And it's like, okay, well, I'm running by this thing. There's obviously something there. Like, what's there, right? And then eventually, another quest later on might tell you, like, hey, go give this pass to the guard at this gate, and now you can go through that gate, right? So when you're doing your quest designs, when you start to think about how they intermingle with each other, physically on a level as well as in time and stuff, there can be a lot of like bang for our buck when we might even do, say, level 3 in the game, or what would be the third level, or third area, and then like maybe 5 or 10 hours later, like we go back there, right? And then we go back there again for a second time. But maybe some conditions of the world have changed, or we're more stronger. Whatever that is, that level could get invaded by a new enemy force, or some bad event happens that changes that level or something like that. And so there could be some really fun, interesting dynamics there where the player's already familiar with the level, but now he has to go back into it. Now he's much stronger, or he's different, or he's changed, and you can get a lot of, interesting stuff to happen, if that's the case. So keep that in mind as well. That, again, the most basic level quest design seems really straightforward, but when you really start layering in all the complexities, it gets really, really, really complicated really fast, right? So, but there's a certain amount of knowledge. I know we did a study when I was at Ubisoft about like even people replaying levels, and on one hand we would be like, oh, why would people want to like replay a level, and go back to the same place again, right? You think like, oh, they want new again, right? But that's actually not true. We did some studies that showed that a lot of people, in the same way if you think about like a multiplayer game, right? You'll play the same game over and over and over again, and a lot of the success in those games is about level memorization, and the more familiar you are with the level, then you're going to have a strategic tactical advantage, while you're playing against other players. So in that same way, there's a certain amount of familiarity that when we get familiar with a location, and we revisit those locations, that we don't have to worry about like memorizing the level anymore, and so our attention and our focus can go to other places. But you think about this as a new player, especially in the beginning of a game, you're trying to figure out the story. You're trying to figure out the base controls and the camera and the weapons and the combat, and how to move and like what the level is, where am I going and what's important. And, it's just overwhelming for most players, right? If you're not a hardcore gamer and you're getting into most games in the beginning, it's really, really, really confusing on just like, what do I got to do, right? And so there's a certain point when if you can reduce some of that down and get them familiar with certain things, they don't have to know that all the time. They become happier because there's a certain level of familiarity with it, right? So don't feel like you have to keep taking them always to new locations, but think about like how could you reuse a location? Like I had a game I designed where the halfway through the game, we gave you a new device that then allowed you to see ghosts, and now you basically could go back through the entire game, and now all the physical levels, every building, every room, everything was exactly the same, but now we basically spawned in a whole second set of enemies that were all ghosts and the undead, and now I could see them, and I got weapons to be able to fight them and capture them, and all that kind of thing. And so I literally was able to double the length of the game, but I was able to minimize the repetition because suddenly there was all new, encounters there to do. So those are things where you can get a lot of interesting, fun stuff that you're able to do, if you're, again, understanding how to reuse things and what's cheap and what's easy. But again, the idea of reusing levels really isn't all that bad. Familiarity is not a bad thing. And so how we cross over in maps and how we're constantly moving through our questing, and like in the very beginning I talked about, this is a journey, right? We're taking the players on a journey. And that journey doesn't have to be just a straight linear path, from point A to point B. That journey can meander and it can wander, and then the next journey, the next quest can take us, and it can cross the paths, and some of the people are familiar, some of the places are familiar. I might know like where to go get healed in an area if I'm in trouble, and things like that. So embrace that as a level designer, as a quest designer, and understand that stuff all works for you more than against you, right? But again, every game and every level is a little different, right? You may not have a lot of I'm going to say choice in the matter, right? And that the technology, you may not be doing an open world game. You may be building very linear levels, and that may not be your choice, but you need to embrace and use what you have, right? And make the best levels you can. So we got 2 more minutes, everyone. Any last minute questions? I hope the ramblings of a madman today were clear, at least trying to explain the complexity again of this really big topic. We will probably continue on with this the next time we get back to this, and I guess it'd probably be in 3 weeks. For those of you that are interested in this, again, next week is the 50th episode, special anniversary edition, or something we're going to do next week that's going to be a one-off. We may play a game and have some fun next week. We'll see. But to celebrate my 50th episode, we'll do something a little different next week. And then the following week is going to be a break week. CG Spectrum was not streaming that week. And so we'll be back. I believe that is the... let's see, the week of I think the 21st would be the week back that we continue this topic. So if you're interested in level design, join us back again on I believe it was, I think it's the 21st. Yeah, the 7th would be the 50th anniversary. The 14th is off, 21st. So come back to see us on the 21st of September. And if you're interested in continuing on about quest design. So thanks, Penny. Glad you enjoyed it, and hope this helps you with your level design stuff that you're working on. Alexios, time flies. 2 hours of me spouting lots of stuff, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it. We'll see what happens next week. We'll find something fun to keep us all entertained and give me a little bit of a break next week. This is always a challenge, rambling for 2 hours. So anyways, Big Lob, thanks again. We will sure talk to you very soon. And otherwise, everybody, have a great week and be safe. And for those of you in the U.S., have a good holiday weekend. And unfortunately, here in California, all my plans got changed because they just shut down all the parks. I guess they don't want us contributing to COVID and to fires and everything else in California. So they shut down all of our national parks and the state parks for the next 2 weeks. So no camping, no hiking, no off-roading, no more plans for Troy. So we'll see. Crazy times. Yeah. I kind of understand why the government's doing it, but it's like the biggest camping weekend of the year, and so suddenly now all the campgrounds just got shut down today. So that was really fun. So, oh well, so much for my plans. So, all right, everybody, have a great week, and we will see you all here hopefully next week. Take care. Bye now.